Hello, everyone. We have reached day 49 of our series, 75 Days of Partition. It has been an immensely useful and informative journey till now, and we shall continue the same till 17th of August. This series is meant to commemorate 75 years of partition. I am a Prajita, a story scholar with the 1947 Partition Archive, and it has been my great honor to co host this series with Gunita, Sonam Kalra, and Noor Anand Chawla. Today I have here with me another story scholar, Azeem Khan. He has
Hi.
taught Pakistan studies at college level for 4 years. After that, he completed his master's in South Asian Studies from Columbia University, New York, before joining the archive for some formal training in the field of oral history. He has been a recipient of the 1947 Partition Archive Story Scholarship, and under that, he has been documenting oral history of partition witnesses in and around Lahore. Welcome, Azeem. Uh, it
Hi,
will be
thank you,
quite
Prajita.
it will be quite amazing to know your experiences while collecting all these partition stories. So, how did you get interested in partition history, and what motivated you to collect oral histories?
Thank you, Prajita. So, first of all, I wasn't very interested in partition growing up. I studied history in college as well. I taught it for a few years, but partition as a subject, I just found it so trite. I just found it very boring. Um, it usually revolved around the politics of partition and leading figures such as Jinnah, Nehru, and Gandhi. However, the stories that did interest me in college and while teaching were stories like those of Manto, Tagore, from before partition as well. And because they showed a more complete, a more holistic view of how life in India was before and after partition, especially during. Um, so outside the halls of politics, that's the kind of stories I was interested in. And with 1947 Partisan Archive, I was still in New York when we had an email for Columbia for this Partisan Archive, and I thought, well, listening to the stories of partition from the as they would say horse's mouth, that interested me much more than the partition stories I was used to, especially because partition was such a seminal, probably the most seminal event, the most taught, the most relevant event in subcontinent's history, right, in South Asia's history. So um, I was very interested in listening to people's stories from their own mouths. In Pakistan, I don't know about India, but in Pakistan, we definitely, it was like our elders had suppressed the story of partition. Like they didn't really talk about it. So we never had any exposure to partition narratives outside like the Pakistan establishment or Pakistani states narrative. Like Pakistan was made because it was special and because God ordained it to be the bastion of Islam or something, which, like I said before, it didn't really interest me that much. But the having to being able to talk to the people firsthand, and as a student of history and an inspiring historian, I was always interested in primary sources. So this was as primary as a source gets, right? People who lived through partition. You're not reading anyone's account of partition, but that person's account himself or herself. And secondly, oral histories. I was always interested in oral history. It was a neglected aspect, especially in like Western forms of historiography, because documentation was given more leeway, more weight. Um, in Pakistan, in India, Kissa Khwani, Dastan Goi, whatever you call it, these are very like Indian traditions, very South Asian traditions, and I was always interested in them, and I thought they were more legitimate than they were being usually given credit for. And so this was an opportunity that I was definitely very interested in, and to also get the formal training in oral history myself by conducting so many interviews. Um, so these are basically some of the things that interested me in collecting oral histories with regards to partition.
That's quite interesting to know. So, tell us how has been your journey while collecting all these interviews in Lahore? As you say that you are meeting, you have been collecting lived memories, these lived primaries or resources that you have been talking with, and also share some of the interesting things that you could explore during this period, something that was, you can call a unique insight or an incident or an experience that happened during your journey.
So for me, I've conducted in many cities, not just Lahore, but the primary would be Lahore and Mianwali, and I'll give you some interesting stories from my journeys there. In Lahore, so firstly, um, uh, I've conducted a lot of interviews with my extended family because, of course, that's the immediate link that I have. The immediate resource that I have are the elders in my own family, and so one thing I got to connect with a lot of the older people in my family and my extended family, which was very nice. And secondly, it I interviewed most of my family had migrated from Jalandhar to Lahore, and so I've never been to Jalandhar. I did want to, but I mean, it never really, there wasn't a yearning. So the more I interviewed the people from there, the more I got to know about Jalandhar and life in Jalandhar. So basically, all the Pashtuns used to live in these 12 bastis in Jalandhar, or you could say just on the outskirts of Jalandhar. They were all Pashtun bastis, and fortified with their own markets, very interesting histories. I got to know some very interesting facts about Jalandhar. For example, apparently Jalandhar had the highest rate of bachelor graduates in all of India. Um, s- Other than that, there was so firstly these bastis and how all the Pashtuns were living with the Hindus and the Sikhs. They didn't really have any issues, and even in partition, there weren't partition riots in Jalandhar. One of my extended relatives, they were in Hoshiarpur, and there she lost like 60 people in her family. She had this very harrowing tale about how she saw her mother murdered in front of her. Everyone but her aunt was killed, and her aunt was only spared because one of the attackers recognized her as his daughter's teacher. So he said, "Okay, let her go." They only cut off like a couple of fingers from her hand. So she lost 60 people in her family. That was in Hoshiarpur, but in Jalandhar, there were hardly any killings, and they were also very well educated. Like I said, the people of Jalandhar were well educated. They had government jobs, they were influential, and they also had like a lot of ammunition. So the Sikhs in the areas did not and they had good relations with especially Sikhs. But the most interesting thing I found about, could we please start the slides now? So other than me really wanting to, after doing all these interviews, I really did have this longing in me to go to Jalandhar, learn more about the history and of my own family's history. For example, everyone must have heard about Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan and the Khan Gharana, and they were from
Yeah,
Jalandhar.
yeah.
And so my one of my elders, she said that in all the Pashtun and all the Basti ki weddings, they would have the Khan family, and that's how they got their start. And so they would come to all our weddings. And so she also told me that Jagjit Singh was also from Jalandhar. I was like, wow. So the Jalandhar seems like a very it had a very musical Jagjit Singh,
Yeah.
Nusrat Ali Khan, and that's like the legends of Indian music. Um, Apparently, other than that, one of them also told me that Jalandhar had one of our relatives was the first wrestler there. He was a very famous wrestler there. Jalandhar is where cricket started in India earnestly, and some of the best cricketers, and you can see now in Pakistan as well, came from Jalandhar. And Pakistan Olympians, Pakistan's first hockey captain, Pakistan's uh, three captains from one family, cousins from one family captain Pakistan, the Pakistan cricket team. So so the first slide we have, can we have it on screen? So this is like one. This is a Bakar Khani. This is so every tribe in Jalandhar, in the every basti, they had their own family designs. Like they would have this. So this is one family, one basti, and this is their familial. You could I don't know, English analogy for it, but this is like a family heirloom. It's like their design. It's like who they are. This represents their life and their basti. Um, and can we go on to the next slide, please? So this is my favorite part of the Jalandhar story, where so apparently, the last about 6 or 7 of the people I interviewed, they gave me this story, and this story was a prime example of oral history, where this story was passed down from generation to generation, and the story goes like this: the tenth Sikh of the same tenth Guru of Sikhism, Guru Gobind Singh, he was being hunted by Aurangzeb, and Aurangzeb was after him. So he took refuge in the bastis of Jalandhar. One of their elder at that time was called Sheikh Darwesh. He was also like a religious leader, and what happened was they gave refuge to Guru Gobind Singh. Um, so to make him blend in with them, at that time the Sikhs used to have um, n- they had shaved hair. Didn't have any beards, but the Pashtuns did. They had their long flowing robes, the the long hair and the long beards. So to make the guru blend in, they were taking him, and the guard stopped him. The royal guard stopped him and said, "Who is this?" They said, "Oh, he's just one of our princes." They were escorting him, so they had to make him look just like a Pathan. So since that day, they say that the Sikhs adopted that tradition of long hair, long beard, and according to them, according to their oral history tradition, it's because the Pashtuns of Jalandhar, the Barkis, gave refuge to Guru Gobind Singh. If you go on to the next slide, um, this is he'd marked the I've remarked it. He also showed me this book. This book is from like 17th century, or early 18th century, and it this paragraph that I've marked, it talks about very briefly how the Pathans of Jalandhar gave refuge to the Guru. So coming to my Mianwali leg, this I was just there last weekend. It was absolutely fascinating. So what I did was I started interviewing some of the guys there, and firstly, the first thing that popped out to me was they didn't call partition Taksim or partition. They didn't call it by a word that denoted separation. They called it Loti, which means it comes from loot. So the only reference they had in their mind to partition was looting. So what they remember, yeah, I know this guy, he got a lot of this stuff. So apparently, in this area, especially Mia Valley and around it was Harnaul, a part of Mianwali. It had some of the biggest grain and especially kanak and chana grain markets in India, and so a lot of wealthy Hindu merchants shifted to that area to get close and built factories there to get closer to that market. So the Hindus were very well off. So when the partition happened, a lot of people saw it as an opportunity to get those goods. And so this is how for the rural people of that area, partition was loti. It was loot. That
Yeah,
was I found that very
actually,
interesting.
yeah, actually, I just very recently read Salman Rushdie's, A Time of Madness, and he also has his familial roots in Jalandhar. And this terminology, he also mentions that how the Sikh landlords who had been uprooted from their land, they used to call it Ujad Dasar, Ujade Dasar. Yeah, and the people who Muslims who came there, and they took over those things that the Sikhs and the Hindus had left behind. They called it loot dasar. That's what you're talking about, loti.
Yeah.
The same terminology is quite fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, that's like I was saying before about why I wanted oral history. Like, this was exactly why. Because, I mean, it never even occurred, like, people could see it like this. And like, a lot of those rural people, I asked them, okay, so what do you remember about 14th August? Don't know. It was the same as any other day. I literally don't even know it was happening. The Muslim League did not have roots. That's well established, actually. They didn't, no one really knew about Muslim League in the villages. Um, and they were very blasé about it. The second thing, and this was across all the interviews I've done, I was very surprised that almost everyone, when I asked them, some people will be like, no, we could live with Hindus and Sikhs. Some were like, we had very good relations with them. They were our friends. They were our, we used to hang out with them all the time, etc., etc. But almost everyone still said, oh yeah, partition was a good thing because Muslims would not have had the same professional opportunities. Like they couldn't have been lawyers or. So I think that was very surprising in that they were very open about it, because like in the state projects there's always like it's given a higher meaning, but for these people they were like, no, it's very, like we wanted more opportunities, and in a united India we just could not compete with Hindus. They were more educated, they had more of the markets, they were more of the merchants. So that was also surprising, that people were just very comfortable accepting that. They weren't like, okay, this is a bad thing, and I personally think it isn't. They were very it was a very practical material decision to make. And secondly, about Mianwali, so we had this amazing, so I was interviewing these people, they kept talking about there were riots in the Harnoli da Bazaar. In the Hanoli area, there were riots. We went to Hanoli. So I asked my guy to take me to Hanoli. So we went to Hanoli to this mosque. Some people said, we asked around. Some people said, there used to be a mandir, which is now a mosque. So so here it is. This is the can you see behind? So this is a mosque, very big mosque. It's the Eidgah, the Jame Masjid. This is the big mosque of the area, and here is the remnants of that mandir. There's like guys, the cows on next to it, like abandoned, not treated well at all. But so we found this mandir. It was fascinating just being still part interior of that mosque. So I just started chatting to the Qari Sahib, the Imam of the mosque. And I said, where are you from? He said, we came from Ambala in 1947 and stayed here and only. I asked him about the riots. He said, yeah, there's riots. And there were riots, but that's like do bazaar dur. दो बाजार छोड़ के वहां पे हुए थे, वहां मलकों का घर भी है. So we were very tired. It was 5 p.m. We'd been out since 9. It was absolutely hot and humid. But I was like, I need to see this Harnoli market where all the action happened. I just need to see it. So we went there. We kept asking around. Some people said, yeah, there's there. We've heard there was rioting there. So we had like, we went to one market and there was this guy who said, yeah, I know. There's this Malik Asar there, Malik Wajid या वारिस असर. ही इज वेरी इंटरेस्टेड, उसको बड़ा शौक है इन चीज़ों का, उसको इन्हीं चीज़ों का शौक है, वो आपको सारा बता देगा. So then this local on his bike, he said, yeah, he'll escort you there. He escorted us to this Malik Asar. So we went to this Malik Asar. This is a picture from his place. So we went there, we were waiting for him to come out. And this was his a watchtower. So old school watchtower. So he told us, so what happened was he comes in. This is the Malik Waris Asar. So this is the guy. So it turned out he is like the local oral historian. So we managed to, after like doing this detective work, I managed to locate this local historian who was famous in the area as being like a geek for history. And so he gave us this oral history masterclass. So he sat us down. I was just asking him about, I just wanted to know. He sat down, beneath that tree. There's like 10 people around. So the oral history class is in session. He says, मैं शुरू करता हूँ 1600 से. 1600 में हमारा जो कबीला था वो यहाँ से आया. बड़े तरीके, and he was like very impartial, no like Muslim bias or anti-Hindu vitriol. It was like very matter of fact, like it seemed trained or something. So, and again he gave us the whole background, how his people came, what then happened, then what happened after the British came, and then the Malik Roop Chand, no, the Roop Chand, who was the Indian merchant, he was the money lender. Then people couldn't give the money back. He acquired their land, and then it was all legal. But then this whole the locals couldn't come to terms with the British legal system, and they couldn't accept that their land is just taken away. And so this whole issue developed, and he told us how the 1934 riots happened, then how the people who were responsible for that were sentenced to Burma. And then when the Japanese acquired Burma, those people came back, and then the 1947 riots happened. So it was part two of those original riots. And he just gave such a beautiful oral history masterclass. Half an hour, we were just entranced by him underneath this beautiful tree, just as the sun is setting. And so this is right. He also showed us. He said this watchtower in 1947. They sent in the army, the tanks. They were very. They drove out the Hindus who didn't want to go. They wanted to live here. They drove the Hindus out. The army brought three tanks. He said they bombed the watchtower as well. This watchtower, some Hindus took protection in this as well. And yeah, that he told us this amazing story. I'll go back to him as well. I'll go back to this area, and we found a lot of like people who are supposed to be 100 plus, like in these villages. And the fascinating thing was, like, one of the guys I interviewed was 89, 85, 90. He had a full head of hair, barely gray, barely gray. A lot of it was still dark. You can't tell. Some people say, "Oh, I'm 120." Someone's like, "Oh, this person 110." Maybe not. Like the ages are not set in stone, but they're like people are really really old in these areas, and so they're like they were 15 or 20 when they survived partition. And they're very fascinating accounts of partition, like they were away from the cities. So that's another thing that I was very interested in, how the partition experience was completely removed from in the villages, was completely removed from those of the cities and those that we read in our history books. Our history books just do not tell us what people in the villages experienced partition as, and what it was to them. Yeah, those are some of my experiences from Lahore and Mianwali.
Yeah, that's quite true what you have said about things that we learn through oral histories cannot be learned from books. But also tell that what are some of the challenges that you have faced during your journey and how have you tried to overcome them?
The challenges would be firstly getting interviewees. Um, so so I of course started with my family, did some friends as well, some the archive recommended to us. I think the real challenge was getting village interviews for me, and thankfully through again an extended like far relative who you live in Mianwali, I asked them, and um, I didn't overcome that challenge. That person overcame that challenge for me, because that person was very interested in history himself, and he was also like sort of a local politician. So he loved interacting with people, and he knew a lot of people from the distant villages around Mianwali, and he was able to like identify a lot of people. So there's like I interviewed six people at this weekend, but I have like 20. He says there's 50 people, and there are. So I plan to do like one village and like 4 or 5 people in that village, then similar to that, yeah.
Yeah, so I've also faced plenty myself, and but the good ones always make you believe in the work you are doing. There are some interviews
Yeah,
which really make you feel that you're doing something great.
yeah.
I had an absolutely amazing time getting to know more about your fabulous journey as a fellow story scholar, and it is truly an incredible experience that we have during this time, meeting all these people, opening up with them so they can let us in their life story and empathizing with them. And they feel so good sometimes that somebody is listening to them, right? Uh, for me, this fact that they are heard, the feeling that their stories matter, it feels like an achievement. Thank you for being here today, Azim. I wish you success on your noble journey ahead.
Thank you. My pleasure was my pleasure. 100%.
And for those who are watching, thank you for joining. It is your love and incredible support that keeps us going. Tune in at the same time tomorrow. Until then, take care.